Welcome to Lifting Your Spirit, a monthly broadcast in which you interview people about their spiritual lives and how they support others in lifting their spirits. I'm Reverend Joel Grossman, Interfaith Minister, Director of Spiritual Services for Constellation Hospice, which is here in Newburyport. And I also offer spiritual coaching virtually on a donation basis.
And I'm Ted Jones, meditation teacher at the North Shore Insight Meditation Community.
Our show is based on the following four principles. 1, everyone is spiritual. Sometimes we are conscious and active in our spiritual lives, sometimes not. But even when we're not, we still have a spirit.
There are many ways to lift your spirit, not only through formal religious practices, but also through nature, art, human relationships, service to others, just to name a few.
Third, each person's spiritual path is unique and may change in small or large ways over time.
And fourth, that it's important to respect your spiritual journey, trusting that one step will naturally lead to the next, and also to respect everybody's unique spiritual journey, regardless of how different it may be from your own. We're not here to convince you of the benefits of any particular method or practice, but more just to give you some food for thought. I'm very pleased to have as our guest today my teacher, friend, and colleague, Keith Kristich. Keith is the founder of Closer Than Breath, an online contemplative community dedicated to the interspiritual teaching and practice of contemplative prayer as a means of awakening to God who is hidden in plain sight. Keith is also a commissioned presenter of Centering Prayer through Contemplative Outreach. As a retreat leader, writer, and teacher of meditation and centering prayer, Keith helps people unlearn rigid religion, reimagine what's divine, and deepen contemplative consciousness in everyday life. Welcome, Keith. We're very pleased to have you here. We always, as we were talking about before, begin by just trying to get a sense of the arc of your whole spiritual journey back from, as far back as you can remember.
Sure. Thank you, Ted and Joel. Yeah, what a treat to be on, and just hearing those four principles that you shared before, just affirmation after affirmation. The uniqueness of the spiritual path, the fact that in our bones and our essence we are spiritual. I just want to, echo and highlight that. So, glad to be here. Jumping into where the spiritual journey, that's a big question, a fun question, and would be fun to map out on pen and paper, maybe even for listeners, for themselves. I grew up in the evangelical world, evangelical church in New York State. In the evangelical world back then, I would say, is much healthier than it is these days, as it gets tripped up in so much political nationalism and such. But I grew up in a world where God loved me. It was a very healthy upbringing. God, the guy in the sky, the Father. Jesus, another guy in the sky, at the right hand of God, the Father, loved me. And that, I think, I'm very grateful for, because it did put me in right relationship with what I would call the universe now, that the universe is ultimately loving, it is ultimately trustworthy. In that evangelical worldview was very particular. God was this very specific thing, and there was just one way to make contact with that one specific thing. And so that's some of the unlearning I've had to do, is to say, well, like, how specific can we get when we talk about the all, the universe, reality? But But for me, it was a healthy upbringing because it was just an affirmative thing to the ego. I was a child of God. And as a child of God, God loved me just like I love my child. I love my son. So even being a father, I mean, this is hopping to now, but being a father, I have a whole new appreciation for approaching God as father or God as mother, to say that God loves me in a similar way that I love my son. So that's a world I grew up in and am grateful for it in many ways. And it also is a twist of reality, just as I think all religion is seeking what is most ultimate truth and making sense of it inside of culture and religion and the times and conditions that we live in. And so it was a good thing for me. And going to an evangelical college was also a light up time for my own spiritual journey, because it was there that I was able to open to something beyond the evangelical worldview. One of the good things about the evangelicals is they're good with quiet time, having personal prayer and not meditation, but personal prayer and read your Bible. Like, how do you get in contact with God? You better read your Bible.
So let me just interrupt you for a little bit. A couple of questions that I have. Were both your parents in the same church? Was it a family thing together going?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely raised in it. And
what denomination was it? Was it a denomination? I really get confused about the sort of word evangelical and what it refers to, because there are different denominations, right?
Sure, there are thousands of different denominations. I think 30,000 Protestant denominations, 30,000.
Wow.
And so that's just for the Protestants. So yes, it's rightly confused. My parents, one of them did grow up Catholic and came very strongly into the evangelical worldview. And so it was certainly a family upbringing that we grew up going to the church, a Wesleyan church. It was one of those more mega churches in New York. So there was a couple thousand of people inside of what looked like a mall. You know, it was a mall. It had a Tim Hortons in it. And so you think of Jesus like kicking out the money collectors inside the temple, and here we have a corporate Tim Hortons, which is interesting. You know, I got questions about that. So, yeah, it was Wesleyan, and I ended up going to a Wesleyan college, very similar to Methodist, and so yeah, definitely a family affair, and it's fun to even watch my parents change on the spiritual journey as well, because they're not the same evangelicals that they were back then. So,
Now, you said about the college that it was an evangelical college, but it introduced you to more than evangelical concepts. Is that right?
that's right, and for good and for bad. You know, there's like a dark night of the soul when you realize your worldview isn't reality, isn't the same thing as reality. And so to recognize that is there's a darkness, a depression, a sort of, you know, it's like, am I an atheist? Like, is any of this truth? Do I even believe in God? If the core essential tenets of my prior belief system no longer add up to reality, then it's like, what do I really believe? And maybe these days I don't get too tripped up on beliefs anyways, but yeah, it was a good place. I would say we had, I think it was more of a personal experience that when I was doing my own prayer meditation, I would listen to music. I would actually listen, I'd listen to music and 3 songs in particular, and would just fall into silence after these 3 songs. And I had no clue of what to call it. It just felt like this well of depth and simplicity and a simple joy. And I thought, this is meditation, and in my small-minded evangelical world, meditation equaled Buddhism, and so was exploring Buddhist practice at the start, which is so helpful because, as Ted, as you know, is a Vipassana teacher, Buddhists are pretty good at meditation or talking about it. And
yeah,
so,
one of us strengths.
but that was a huge asset to do that. But it was this danger, you know, like in the evangelical world, is Buddhism safe? And the answer is no, by the way, usually. And so, yeah, but I was invited shortly after to a retreat center in New York, Mount Irenaeus, and there they were talking about not meditation so much, but contemplation, contemplative prayer. and they were teaching about centering prayer from the pulpit. From the pulpit, teaching centering prayer, Father Bob, every time he gave a homily. And so I was able to, eventually I was able to live there for 9 weeks. I slept in a tent, sort of like a mini friar, if you will. And so I was able to like really establish my own practice while living there with them at the friary. And so that was really beautiful, because while the Buddhist and meditation language, it was clarifying my own inner experience, what I was feeling was just subtly different. And so going to Mount Irenaeus, hearing about contemplation as opposed to meditation, which they're not really in conflict, but hearing about union with God just sort of was more speaking to that inner experience that I was exploring. And so that was a really grounding experience to be able to go there repeatedly, again, as an evangelical, going to a Franciscan friary. That's, again, a no-no. Like Catholics, sorry,
Yeah.
you might be going to hell, maybe, from that worldview. And so there's questions there, too. But ultimately, trusting that inner experience, you just learn over and over that whatever you believe or think or understand about reality, like God especially, is beyond it, transcends our understanding. And so God, therefore, must transcend our religions.
So this, I mean, it sounds like it was a revelatory time for you, and yet a really painful one. That you talked about the dark night and the sense of your view of things really being disruptive. That it was. I get the sense it wasn't an easy transition. That you were drawn, but that there were, I don't know, doubts, second thoughts. Do I really understand any of this? Is that accurate?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, what you get in conservative religion, I think this is true of evangelicals or conservative Catholics or conservative Muslims or conservative XYZ, is you get the blueprint. Like, every conservative religion, conservative being a generic word, is just, here's the ABCs. Like, here's the Bible, here's what it says, here's what it means, here's the Quran, here's what it says, here's what it means. Believe and it will be okay. And so it turns it turns God into a math equation. And God is infinite. And what is infinite cannot be baked into finite numbers and be measurable. And so God is mystery. And so it was dark, because when you feel like you have all the answers, and then you have an internal experience that you simply cannot deny. You can deny your inner experience and sort of push it into your shadows, into the unconscious, and then you'll deal with it 20 years later. But if you're willing to look at your inner experience and to see that it doesn't add up with the blueprint that you've been given, or in this case that I was given, there is darkness. And it is especially dark when it's related to the salvation of your soul. As an evangelical, it's not just like, oh, my political beliefs should be different now that I believe something different. It's that you might go to hell if you start believing the wrong thing. And so it is dark. And I think there was a greater safety net to know it from an internal way, because I think a lot of people, there's a whole movement, ex-evangelicals, and a huge movement of, I don't know if it's millions of people, I mean hundreds of thousands of Americans at least, but maybe millions of people that are ex-evangelicals, but it's a reaction to confronting an external reality that doesn't add up with the blueprint they've been given. And there's a real hard pushback then, and even more pain. For me, I would suggest is what, at least how I interpret it now, is I had this internal experience that didn't add up to the blueprint that I was given. And that internal experience was also filled with grace and filled with God's being within me, and filled with a sort of basic trust known from the inside out, that even if all of that doesn't make sense and the blueprint doesn't make sense, there's something in here that I can trust. So I have to say it's dark and light in my case. I think for many that unlearn their religion without an inner experience that's grounding, it's only darkness, because you lose your church, you lose your community, you lose your belief system, you lose it all, and there's nothing to fall back on. unless you have something that cultivates that trust inwardly. So,
And it sounds like that's part of the work that you've taken on to help people with that.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's a sacred work, and it feels good. Unlearning rigid religion just is what I mean. Millions, billions of people grow up within rigid religion, and I, for one, do not hate religion. Exoteric religion, external only religion, boxing God in or the infinite. I have a lot of, hate would be a strong word. I have a big pushback on that external form, but I think religions give us the inward tools of prayer, of meditation, of chant, of contemplative practice, and that they are the containers that humanity has for true spiritual awakening, and not just psychological coping mechanisms as we see in meditation or mindfulness only communities. Like, how do we cope with stress? Like, how do we, I think the religions are about that inward journey, and so they have the tools. So I don't want to reject them, and so I want to help people unlearn what's rigid about them, but embrace the treasure chest that each of them are.
So there you are at the college, and your mind's getting blown. And what happens next?
Yeah.
And going to the Franciscan monastery
Right,
on a regular basis, and having a 9-week stay there. And what was that like? Was it a silent practice most of the time in the monastery?
Right. So they're the order of OFM, Franciscan Friars. So this is the same order of Richard Rohr, Father Richard Rohr, if many would. They're connected to the St. Bonaventure University, which is where Thomas Merton taught. So they're a Thomas Merton retreat center. And Franciscans are well known for being out in the world, serving the poor. This is a unique contemplative arm of the Franciscans. And so a real hybrid between the service, heart-focused, or world-focused Franciscan culture and the inward practices of contemplation. And so there's a retreat center. It's a family. It's a beautiful, beautiful retreat center, Mount Irenaeus, for anybody that wants to go and visit. It's really a family atmosphere. Like, when you go there, you're on retreat, but also if you're up for helping make dinner, come and help make dinner. Like, it's community. And so there's really just two contemplative prayers during the day that you don't have to go to, but you're welcome to. There's Mass throughout the week. They would, well, maybe I shouldn't say this, but let lowly Protestants take communion there. And so they're just a very open space. I've been there with Buddhist monks as well, participating in everything going on. So it's just a really beautiful 400 acres of land and yada yada. But when living there, it is this daily routine of waking up in this contemplative container, and then preparing the space for people on retreat, having lunch or breakfast with folks on retreat, helping facilitate the programs that are going on, and just watching people. For me, just watching people come in. Often it would be like on a weekend on Friday, and they're coming in kind of frazzled, and then like they stay through the weekend, and on Sunday morning, this like beautiful Mass that's an open homily. Like the homilies, they would talk for 10 minutes max, and then open to the congregation. What do you think? You're a wisdom teacher. What do you think? Wow. So I'd see these people come in for a retreat, frazzled, and then by the weekend just being breathing out. And so that was a very inspiring space for me to just recognize the importance of this contemplative work, that it is a work. And oddly enough, it is my work, my professional work now, and which is its own confusing world. But it was probably the central place that taught me that I wanted to be involved in this kind of inward focus work, because I could just see the very, very real impacts on people's lives as they came and left. So,
when you left college, I mean, what was the path toward, as you say, becoming a spiritual professional? Is basically, I think, a good term. Someone who's really that's their life work. How did that unfold?
Yes, slowly, and wasn't necessarily, even leaving that retreat center, it wasn't like, I know I want to do this. Whatever this is as a spiritual professional, it wasn't that sense that I knew that that was going to be something I would pursue full time, but I knew it was part of a piece of what I wanted to do. Immediately afterwards, I worked for 7 years at a nonprofit in the city of Buffalo, Push Buffalo, and started there with 2 years working as a staff of a community center, working with kids, mostly refugees from literally all over the world, from Kenya, Somalia, Burma. Like, I knew thousands of kids from our neighborhood and speaking so many different languages. And this organization was a community organizing activist organization. It was a housing organization, and we just happened to run a community center. So working there for a couple of years, eventually became the manager of that space, and was there for 7 years. And it is on the ground, boots on the ground, actions, like direct actions, not just protests and rallies, but truly direct actions that really disrupt things. And so it was a very different world, very action-oriented and very justice-minded. And I was always quietly leading a centering prayer group behind the scenes on Thursday mornings. And so at some point, I could share the story. I don't know how meaningful it'd be, but starting this little centering prayer group out of a church that was right around the corner from where I worked. But it was just two very different worlds. In the morning, doing my prayer and meditation practice at home, leading this little group every day or every week, and then going into work in this amazing space with kids from all over the world and activists that are just like fighting the man and the powers that be. And so that sort of like contemplation and action, like spirituality and embodiment, like really hitting head on, because I wasn't at that point rooted in, I would say it wasn't like rooted in my spiritual, and activism wasn't like integrated as it could be. And for those that were working there, they had the action, but it came out of anger as opposed to love. It came out of like fighting and F you, instead of like, I love my enemies and therefore I'm gonna fight for justice.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you're saying that. That I heard Richard Rohr, who you mentioned before, who a lot of people are familiar with, speak at one point about how he started the Center for Action and Contemplation, and that his expectation was it would be mostly about action, and then just kind of flavor that with contemplative, and that once you started doing it, it just flipped the script, that he realized that you had to really focus on the contemplative aspect first to help people get beyond that anger and that oppositional stance, and to come from it from a more spiritual heart, whatever it was that they were doing. And it sounds like that's what you saw happening there.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly, I get the word. It's a term I've heard our teacher Cynthia Bourgeault mention too, and I think out of Sufism, but enlightened action. We think about spiritual enlightenment, la da da. Yeah. But what about enlightened action? And we don't see a lot of that in this world. And so I think what Richard Rohr is getting at is like there's some sort of spiritual grounding that when we cultivate contemplative consciousness allows our action to be loving as opposed to just anger. And so I know that we were taught in these activist circles to like get in touch with your anger, like what makes you angry, act out of anger. And other more spiritual oriented activists teach, what do you love? If you're angry about something, underneath the anger is you're angry about it because something is happening that's not good about it's disrupting love in a sense. Like you're angry because you think it should be otherwise and you want it to be otherwise and you'd love it to be otherwise. So how do we act out of love as opposed to anger? And so two different models for just even direct action, but even the contemplative orientation, I think, is I think of contemplation sometimes simply just sitting in love. Like, I'm thinking with my son these days, it's like, what are you doing, Dad? It's like, oh, I'm meditating. But I think I'm gonna just start saying, like, I'm sitting in love. Like, I'm just sitting in love.
Beautiful, beautiful.
In nature, and if I can sit in love long enough, then hopefully when I go out into the world, that love is embodied. And just the final thing that just came to mind as you were sharing that too, Ted, is, and don't quote me on this, I gotta research this, but I recall someone saying that Gandhi required the activist he was working with to be in the monastery for 7 years before they were considered qualified to do the kind of direct political action that they were doing. So don't quote me on that, but I've heard that the 7 years of practice, inward practice, before you do the kind of outward practice that action demands. Otherwise, the ego might do something wild.
Now, you mentioned that you started leading centering prayer groups. So if you could talk about how centering prayer came on the scene for you and what centering prayer is for our listeners who are not familiar with that.
Sure, yeah, and Ted, I would love for you to fill in any gaps about centering prayer.
Okay.
Anything I miss here, since it's a shared practice. But it really is a meditation and prayer practice. It is meditation classically as we close our eyes, we sit in stillness, we are letting go of thoughts and emotions and physical sensations and in a sense, wiping the mind clear, not to reach some perfect state of emptiness or blankness, but really to open the heart. And so the sort of Christian contemplative, the mystical tradition that it comes out of is about putting the mind into the heart. Put the mind in the heart. This is your deepest center. This is the center of your being. And so centering prayer is that simple act of letting go as a meditation practice, but it's also a prayer practice in that it's about heart opening. It's this intention to say yes to God, to say yes to the divine that is closer than breath, the divine that is alive and well within us, not the guy in the sky, God out there, but the living reality of God's being that we all have within us. And so centering prayer is a simple practice of saying yes to that reality. And again, I came to the practice through this Mount Irenaeus retreat center, and it just took on a life of its own, which was so difficult, moving away from the retreat center into the city of Buffalo, working in an activist organization, trying to keep up with city life and doing a meditation and prayer practice like that. No easy thing to do in a sense, but it was eventually just felt like called that, like, this is a gift. This practice is a gift. It's like cake. It's like, I want you to eat this cake. And I wanted to give this cake to someone else. And so, that is still from Mount Irenaeus. Like, I saw the impact of the inward work, and wanted to do something with that. And so feeling this practice and seeing the results for myself, just wanted to invite others into that. So I did invite 6 people. I said, six friends. I said, this is what I'm doing. And for 6 weeks, if you want to come for an hour, we'll do a little centering prayer set. I'll do a little micro teaching and a little sit and a little conversation. And so that group continues to meet, which was started in 2023. So that would be 12 years. And that group continues to meet, although I'm no longer the leader as of the last couple of years with the birth of my son. But that's centering prayer in a nutshell. And Ted, anything you want to add maybe?
Well, I think just in understanding centering prayer, most forms of meditation start with an intentional calming of the mind, using concentration techniques. Centering prayer doesn't do that. The centering prayer moves right into the sort of open, receptive awareness, which other forms of meditation sort of come to a little bit down the road. But interestingly, I'm in a interspiritual group that meets once a month, and of people who have a Buddhist and a Christian orientation, and that the reason that people have sort of migrated in that group sort of back to their Christian roots is that it honors the presence of the divine, centering prayer, whereas explicitly, where in Buddhism it's or Vipassana certainly sort of more implicit, but it just isn't an emphasis, and that there can be kind of an arid quality to that practice at times, so that the sort of opening to the presence of the divine as the practice can be just wonderfully spiritually nurturing, and I think that that's what really keeps people coming back to it.
Yeah, beautifully said, Ted. And my own metaphor for this, because I think you're right, so much of meditation, that sort of dryness, or if it's like emptiness only, or like nothingness, which I love emptiness and nothingness, and love that. And it was every year at Easter, I would lead the centering prayer group in this Catholic church. I wasn't Catholic, but they just let us use this space. And big, beautiful Catholic church. And every Easter for the 3 weeks or 4 weeks after Easter, it would just be filled with flowers. So we would all of a sudden go into this beautiful church building where we were sitting in emptiness, is the smell. And then we'd enter an Easter season, and you'd walk in, and it was just perfumed, a scent perfumed with beauty. And so that's my metaphor for how some meditation is. It's very good to be in nothingness and emptiness, but when you add that divine spiritual quality to it, there's a sort of heartfulness or a sweetness or a presence that we affirm as warm, as loving.
Yes.
And scent, perfumed with goodness. So
I would just like to interject, having meditated for many years myself and taught meditation, that the idea of you're going to have emptiness or nothingness is what drives people away from meditation, because it doesn't happen that way. You work towards that, but your mind is active, and you notice it, and you come back to something closer to emptiness for a moment, and again and again and again. So I just want to put out there for anybody who is thinking about meditation, don't expect that you're going to have an experience of emptiness. You're going to have an opportunity to practice noticing what's going on in your mind and letting go.
Yeah.
So I'd like to jump ahead here and talk about Closer Than Breath, the organization, and because we don't have unlimited time here, and I really want to let people understand how that organization started, what's happening now, and how that has impacted you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Ted. I think, it started as an accident, a surprise, a gift, and really very much a child of the pandemic. It was not my intention in any way to form a formal organization, but as the pandemic hit and everybody was at home, I started to offer just a lot of online meditation and centering prayer communities.
And you had been teaching live for a couple of years prior to that, or
that's true. Yeah,
7 years. Maybe we should start there. Sort of when you started to teach actively.
Sure. Yeah. Beside the weekly centering prayer group, I started to do a number of in-person retreats and workshops, doing things combining the Enneagram and meditation and centering prayer. I would offer weekend centering prayer retreats at different retreat centers. So I was already oriented towards doing this sort of work. And actually, prior to the pandemic, I had quit my job and was gifted with my wonderful wife to figure out how to make a little bit of money doing this before you got to go get a real job again. And so I was on this sort of path of exploring what does it mean to not be a pastor or a priest or a monk, and also make a livelihood doing a spiritual work without losing your soul, kind of thing. And so so that was convenient for me, practically convenient when the pandemic hit. I was already in the world doing some teaching. I wasn't working a traditional job at the time. Everybody was at home, stuck with themselves, trying to figure out how to deal with themselves. And so I knew a little bit about that. As meditation teachers, we know that, how to deal with the self. And so yeah, those online offerings, I just put out free offerings and was doing monthly workshops teaching about centering prayer and contemplation and meditation, and eventually started to bring in some other teachers as well. And before we knew it, the pandemic was still rolling. People were still wanting to be a part of our weekly meditation and centering prayer groups. I had put together all this by accident. I was inviting all these, every month I was inviting a different centering prayer teacher to come in to speak. And then I thought, well, why not bring everybody together for one weekend? I've invited 8 people to speak over 8 different months. Let's invite them over 2 days and invite those same 8 people and do a little weekend. And we did a little weekend, which turned out to be like 400 or 500 people online. Wow. And so all of a sudden it was, and people loved it. And we still do that Centering Prayer Summit every year in January. We'll do it again this year. And so it just was very clear that something was growing that was much larger than me, much larger than our just free centering prayer groups. And at this point, we're a very lively membership community. We have, thousands of people receiving our many emails sent throughout the week, and we have all sorts of online programs, whether they're multi-week courses or weekend events or weekly meditation and centering prayer groups, sort of to meet people wherever they are. And so, but not really an intention to set out and start an organization. It just sort of it was like a snowball that got pushed down the mountain kind of thing. So,
and for you personally, what has that journey been like in terms of, you've alluded a little bit, that there's the teaching aspect of it, and you were talking about, the happy to be here today because this is what you really like to do, which is talk about this stuff and teach it, but that starting an organization and being at the top of it, that's a lot of work. And I'm just wondering about how the process evolved for you and how you balance that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's a question that anybody that takes their personal passion and turns it into their professional grapples with. Yeah. I love it. I don't think I could ever work for somebody else. I'll start there. I don't think I could ever be like, quit and then go work for someone else. But it doesn't come without its bumps. And so we are a 4-person team. The team at Closer Than Breath is 4 people at this point, which is amazing, and it is a lot to manage.
Let's note that it is international. And that one of those 4 people, who is the tech guy, actually lives in the Philippines. So
that's right. That's right. God bless Gio. And so he's been a core component from the very beginning. And that international contemplative community is totally essential to Closer Than Breath, because that was one of the gifts of the pandemic, that we can connect like-hearted people from around the world. And so that's a real treasure of Closer Than Breath, as it is of many communities that are meeting online primarily. So but I think my biggest learning is just that the spiritual journey has a lot more to do than with just your contemplative practice, because there's this sort of, once you get into it, you're doing your daily meditation or prayer, and you're like, that's the spiritual journey, and everything else is just your everyday life. And then at some point you realize, like, actually everyday life is the spiritual journey, and the practice is just training wheels.
Yeah, practice for what? Yeah,
waking up. For what? Yeah. So, and then you turn it into your profession. And now it's rather than talking about or doing the teachings, what does it mean to invite other teachers in? And so the amount of admin and emails on the other side of this call isn't what I want to be doing. I want to be doing this. But the admin is there, plenty of it. And so I think that's the dark side of taking your creative or personal passion and turning into the profession. But it also is just the invitation to just widen what is the spiritual journey. And how is it that just plugging away at emails and bringing contemplative consciousness there is also a piece of the puzzle, is the purpose of practice. And so that's the gift and the practice in itself. So, yeah.
And then the other balance point is you talked about your wife and your kids. So family life, along with the spiritual life and the professional life.
Yes, that's right. When dirty diapers turn into a spiritual practice.
That's beautiful.
Chop wood, carry water.
That's right. That's right.
So we're reaching the end of our time. Is there anything that you'd like to bring up that we haven't touched on so far today?
I mean, the big thing for me that I keep coming back to is the joy of the journey too. I think like spiritual seekers and meditation prayer people, like we're all after peace. I think that, or maybe I'm after peace and I project that on others. But I think everybody wants peace in a chaotic world. And I also think with the like flip side of peace is joy. You know, like peace, if you stir it up, it becomes joy. Joy, if you let it settle down, it becomes peace. And I think we can become the like serious spiritual seekers, like people listening to this. There's a seriousness sometimes about our spiritual journey, and it's like, loosen up, you know, like laugh a little, watch a movie, like do something weird and wild. I just got orange Halloween socks. I'm gonna start wearing my bright orange cat Halloween socks. Like, why the hell not? It's so I just think about that, how to not take the spiritual journey too seriously, and what it means to embody that. So,
yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's a good. We always ask, how do you help people lift their spirits as a final question. I think you answered that pretty well there, unless there's anything else you want to add as a final word to our audience today.
Yeah, do a little prayer, do a little meditation, but watch a good movie.
Okay, that sounds great.
Amen.
Keith, this has been wonderful having you here. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great conversation.
Yeah,
And,
very good, Joel and Ted. Honored to be with you, and keep it up. The world needs these conversations. So thanks for letting me be a part.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, audience, for being with us, and we hope you'll join us again next month.